Welcome to Night Talk.
Hi, I'm Reverend Dave Christensen, your host for Night Talk. Tonight's episode is going to be about near-death experiences, evidence of an afterlife. In 1901, Duncan MacDougall, a physician from Massachusetts, wanted to scientifically determine if his soul had weight. He identified 6 patients in nursing homes whose deaths were imminent. 4 were suffering from tuberculosis, 1 from diabetes, and 1 from an unspecified cause. MacDougall specifically chose people who were suffering from conditions that caused physical exhaustion, as he needed the patients to remain still when they died to measure them accurately. When the patients looked like they were close to death, their entire bed was placed on an industrial-sized scale that was sensitive to within 0.2 of an ounce, 5.6 grams, on the belief that humans had souls and animals didn't. I don't think he really took in consideration the body mass of human beings and animals. He used dogs. So when you compare the size and the weight, his scale may not have detected the loss of the spirit from an animal. But I'll play you a video that talks about Duncan MacDougall's experiment.
Do we have a soul? And if so, is it measurable? On April 10, 1901, an unusual experiment was conducted in Dorchester, Massachusetts. Dr. Duncan MacDougall was going to prove that the human soul had mass and was therefore measurable. He conducted this experiment on 6 dying patients who were placed on specially made Fairbanks weight scales just prior to their deaths. The patients were selected based upon their imminent death. 2 patients were suffering from tuberculosis. A total of 5 men and 1 woman were selected for this experiment. Dr. MacDougall's intention was to weigh each body, before and after death, to determine if there were any differences noted on the precision scale. In the company of 4 other doctors, Dr. MacDougall carefully measured the weight of his first patient prior to his death. Once the patient died, an interesting event occurred. MacDougall explains.
Suddenly, coincident with death, the beam end dropped with an audible stroke, hitting against the lower limiting bar and remaining there with no rebound. The loss was ascertained to be 3/4 of an ounce.
What caused this weight loss? Everything was taken into account, from the air in the lungs to bodily fluids. It still could not be explained. The experiment continued on the next patient with the same results. Dr. MacDougall felt he was on to something extraordinary. According to Dr. MacDougall,
the instant life ceased, the opposite scale pan fell with a suddenness that was astonishing, as if something had been suddenly lifted from the body. Immediately, all the usual deductions were made for physical loss of weight, and it was discovered that there was still a full ounce of weight unaccounted for.
Following the experiment and consulting with the other attending physicians, it was determined that the average weight loss of each person was 3/4 of an ounce. Dr. MacDougall concluded that the human soul weighed 21 grams. All 5 doctors took their own measurements and compared their results. Not all the patients lost the same weight, but they did lose something that could not be accounted for. And then something interesting occurred on the 3rd patient. He maintained his same weight immediately upon death. It was only after a minute had passed that he finally lost an ounce of weight. Dr. MacDougall explained this discrepancy as follows.
I believe that in this case, that of a phlegmatic man, slow of thought and action, that the soul remained suspended in the body after death, during the minute that elapsed before its freedom. There is no other way of accounting for it, and it is what might be expected to happen in a man of the subject's temperament.
Dr. MacDougall conducted the same experiment on 15 dogs. The experiment showed no change in weight following their death. MacDougall concluded that this may signify only humans have souls. H. Laff Twining, a physics teacher at Los Angeles Polytechnic High School, attempted the same experiment on mice in 1917. His conclusion was in line with that of Dr. MacDougall. There was no deviation in weight when the mice died. Dr. MacDougall admitted that more research needed to be done, but following his experiments, he diverted his attention to obtaining the ability to photograph the soul as it left the human body. Unfortunately, he failed to establish any further scientific breakthroughs. Dr. Duncan MacDougall passed away in 1920. No further credible experiments have been conducted to verify MacDougall's claims. But doesn't it make you wonder? Do we have a soul which can be measured?
NBC News Today's Show had a special series, Do You Believe? Touching the Afterlife, with correspondent Jenna Bush Hager as she visited with Dr. Sam Parnia of the State University of New York at Stony Brook, who was conducting cutting-edge research comparing the accounts of people who've had near-death experiences. There are remarkable consistencies in the accounts, Parnia says. I'm going to play that video from the Today Show right now, and I'll let you be the judge of it.
This morning, using science to explore near-death experiences, I neglected to say that Jenna was joining us for trending, so now I will just introduce her as part of this series. Jenna, good morning.
Good morning, guys. Imagine having a near-death experience where you leave your physical body but remain conscious. Is this the afterlife? Thanks to cutting-edge science, there are tools to measure those accounts, and there are some stunning consistencies.
I found myself flying through a star-filled realm.
It's a glimmer of heaven, many say.
Is rapture. It's beyond description.
I just felt absolutely ecstatic.
Transformative, miraculous, even magical. But are they actually real?
What happens during these experiences?
Well, people who come close to death for any reason typically describe a sensation of being profoundly peaceful and comfortable. Some of them describe a tunnel and a bright, warm, welcoming light.
Dr. Sam Parnia of SUNY Stony Brook and author of Erasing Death conducts cutting-edge research.
Probably the most interesting aspect of this is that a small group of them, not everybody, describes a sensation of actually separating from themselves and watching doctors and nurses trying to save their lives, except that they're clinically dead.
In the AWARE study, Dr. Parnia looked at 2,000 cases. Using auditory tests, they timed consciousness for up to 5 minutes after the brain had shut down.
40% of people had a perception of having had awareness, which was phenomenally high. 10% of them had a classical near-death experience, and about 3% of them actually had full consciousness and awareness and could describe things.
And in one man's case, with verifiable accuracy.
He was able to recall details for up to 5 minutes of events that were charted exactly as had occurred, even though the brain shuts down within 2 to 20 seconds.
So that was 5 minutes while he was
He was clinically dead, that's right. While he was dead, and his brain would not have been functioning.
Millions of people have had near-death experiences. There is a tremendous amount of science.
Dr. Jeffrey Long is a radiation oncologist and author of God and the Afterlife.
I've studied over 4,000. You see a very consistent pattern of elements.
Long says he observes remarkable parallels.
There may be a life review where they see part or all of their prior life. They may encounter deceased relatives. These are joyous reunions. The two most common words used to describe a near-death experience are peace and love.
An after people survive, he sees dramatic lifestyle changes.
These changes include an increased belief in an afterlife and a decreased fear of death. They may leave jobs where they're forced to act out in materialistic ways.
But not everybody believes the accounts, and some completely dismiss the near-death concept.
People are skeptical about it.
People who are skeptical about them often think that these are simply hallucinations.
Parnia is conducting a new study, giving specific sounds through an earpiece to patients in cardiac arrest. Unusual images will also be placed high and facing the ceiling, so they're only visible to somebody looking down from above. In theory, to a soul separated from a physical body.
If you come back and say you saw Dr. Smith or Dr. Jones, what they were doing, the question is, will you also see the image that's in the room that is independent and that you would not have been able to guess because it's not something you'd expect to see on TV?
So this connects up here.
This exactly.
And now he hopes to enroll other hospitals.
Yeah, I hope we'll inspire other doctors to start thinking about how they should be measuring what's happening in the brain.
Ultimately, not only will research help patients survive and recover, it will also shed light on the enduring mystery of what really happens after we die.
There's a vast amount that we can learn from near-death experiences.
While the research is ongoing, members in the near-death community believe that science and medical professionals are becoming more accepting of the concept. And I have to say, if anything, it gives us hope that there's this peace.
Yeah.
And he also says that it's not a religious thing necessarily, that this is a medical study to see what people hear and see, and the images are put in places where you'd have to be on top of the room, not laying in the bed.
Like an aerial view.
So exactly.
It's interesting to see the science. We talked about what you feel inside, but it's interesting when you see how the brain operates. Great. That was great. Thanks, Jenna.
Hello, Today fans. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking that button down there and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives.
Life after death has been studied by scientists at Southampton University who found evidence that conscious awareness can continue for at least a few minutes after death. The medical study is the latest ever into near-death and out-of-body experiences. We'll look at the study and controversy surrounds it. This is a Lip News clip with Elliot Hill and Mark Sovell. The video is called Life After Death, provided by scientists. I'm going to play that video for you now.
Scientists have proof that there is life after death. Well, sort of. What they have discovered is that consciousness may continue even after death. Now, this is a subject that's been treated with a lot of skepticism over the years, but in a most extensive study of its kind, scientists at the University of Southampton in the UK have spent nearly 4 years examining more than 2,000 people who suffered cardiac arrests at 15 hospitals in the UK, the US, and Austria, and have found that 40% of people who recovered described having some form of awareness at the time when they were declared clinically dead. Now, as I said, Mark, the perception is, or the current wisdom is that death occurs about 20 to 30 seconds after your heart stops beating. And the research indicates that it goes on for significantly longer than that. And this is what the sort of top line takeaway from the report is. Quotes, "The evidence thus far suggests that in the first few minutes after death, consciousness is not annihilated. Whether it fades away afterwards, we do not know. But right after death, consciousness is not lost." So this is coming, they got this, as I said, you have to kind of take a little bit of a leap of faith here, but it was conducted by prominent scientists in a sensible, studied fashion. It wasn't just, it is anecdotal, but it was done in a conscientious fashion.
Whenever there's a study like this, doubters will jump on and say, well, that's just because you're lack of oxygen and you're hallucinating and all this, and people will kind of poo-poo it, but this is putting together a large amount of experiential evidence from people who describe the events as well.
And they describe the events in great detail. So one of the, and we're just going to quote this one particular 57-year-old man who suffered a cardiac arrest and was able to, and he was dead. He was clinically dead. He was on the slab and they were trying to revive him with a defibrillator. And he well, I'll read you his account, what he says. He says the following. It's long, but if you listen to it, it'll make sense. We know the brain can't function when the heart has stopped beating, but in this case, conscious awareness appears to have continued for up to 3 minutes. The man described everything that had happened in the room, but importantly, he heard 2 bleeps from a machine that makes a noise at 3-minute intervals, so he could time how long the experience lasted for. He seemed very credible, and everything that he said had happened to him had actually happened. So he was able to describe in detail what people were trying to do. Now, again, people have described this out-of-body experience. There were certain people who described that, the sort of the Hollywood, bright light at the end of a tunnel, all those kind of things. There were certain people who did that, but for the most part, 40% of these people made specific comments about what was specifically happening in the room for that period of time.
People will tend to back up their own religious and philosophical beliefs. If you don't believe in life after death, or if you're an agnostic or an atheist, then you'll just think, oh, that's just ridiculous. But people who have some kind of faith, or even Eastern philosophies, which are thousands of years old, this is all matter of fact to them. There's in Eastern philosophy where you have an astral body, and that is part of you who it leaves your physical body, but it's still you. And so it's possible for this is not like some crazy idea to a lot of people in the world. I happen to think that it's entirely possible. Sure.
Right, but and the difference here is it's not that what they're trying to do is bring it from a question of faith and belief more into sort of empirical evidence. There's always, as I said, it's always going to be hard to really get that empirical evidence because of the nature of the study.
Sure, absolutely.
And the issue. But it seems to be, as I said, this was over 2,000 people that they analysed and examined, and it was done over a 4-year period. So it has weight, and what the results were, and the results from a third-party board of scientists and researchers who read the report certainly said that there was merit in the report, and it bore further investigation and examination.
Well, what do you think? Yeah, are you? I want to know what.
Well, I mean, I think I'll surprise you. I believe that. I mean, I don't believe that there's a moment at which, it's kind of like, it sounds a bit silly, but the way I would view it is it's almost like you're kind of powering down. Mm. And I think there probably is that moment at which it doesn't just, your heart stops beating, but then.
But do you think that
it's not
you
by
carry
pulling
on
the plug
after the fact? Say you don't come back, okay? Say there's a half hour and you're out and you're floating around and you're seeing everything.
Right.
And instead of coming back to say, oh my God, I had this experience, you don't come back. You're gone. You die. Do you think that your conscious carries on?
That's a hard question to answer. It's on any given day it will change, and I was just about to answer you basically with a no on that one, because I think there's that response which is I was dead for 1 billion years before I was ever born, and I think it'll be the same. There's no reason to think that I wouldn't be just as dead after I've lived. If you get what I'm trying to say there, it's just like I was dead before I was ever conceived and came into being. So there is that nothingness.
You say that as if it were a fact. But how do
you're questioning that? Well, yes. Do you have any? Are you one of these past life type of people?
It's possible. Yeah, it's possible. Sure. So you're saying, well,
who were you in a past life? Were you a carer? Were you a nurse or a doctor in a MASH unit? I see you as being on a battlefield somewhere, caring for people.
Oh, okay, fine.
Mopping a brow.
I don't know. I'm just saying that if I don't subscribe to the idea that you were dead forever before you were born. So
okay. Where do you land on this?
I land on I think science is getting to the point of being able to prove something that I hope to be true.
That sounds like a politician's answer. I mean,
I absolutely. I plan on having a good old time after I've gone from this body. I plan on having a blast.
Okay. But it's like Houdini. Houdini said if there was an afterlife, and he was the greatest escapologist of them all, he said, I'll let you know. I'll be able to communicate with you. And I don't think he ever did.
Well, maybe he didn't find he was relying too much on his body, maybe he just didn't have the look. There's plenty of other people who have been able to do what he says, but we'll let our viewers debate that.
Right. So let us know your thoughts. Where do you stand on this? Life after death? Yes, no. Seance? Do you want us to have maybe we should do one of those? You want to do one of those?
Ouija boards? You're just mocking me.
I'm not mocking. No, I'm not mocking you. I believe. I told you it was on any given day. Just today, I'm more on the skeptical side.
Okay.
Anyway, let us know your thoughts, and as always, subscribe to the Lib TV.
There was a news report years ago. I don't remember exactly when, but there was a boy from Alabama that was hospitalized for months with Stevens-Johnson syndrome. Stevens-Johnson syndrome is kind of a rare skin problem. But anyway, he says while he was in the hospital, he saw an angel or God in his room. I'm going to play that video for you right now. It's from WKRG News 5. It's a special report. Is heaven real?
Is heaven for real? A 10-year-old Gulf Coast boy lost 100% of his skin after a 1 in a million reaction to a common antibiotic. During his 4-month stay at Shriners Hospital in Galveston, Texas, one day in particular changed the way he viewed his entire experience. The day Thelonious Jiggle-Schmid Sylvester had a visit from heaven. News 5's Haley Minogue joins us now in the studio. Haley, people claiming to see God or an angel during a near-death experience, that's nothing new. So why is this experience different?
Thelonious's parents rushed him to the hospital, and within hours they learned he had an extreme case of Stevens-Johnson syndrome called toxic epidermal necrolysis. His experience with an angel, Jesus, or God is different because of the clarity he had and the way the experience seemed to signify the end of his hardest days. But does it provide any proof that heaven is for real?
After a while, I saw this man standing in the corner of the room in a white robe and had a beard. He had white skin, a brown beard, brown hair, and he smiled at me, and then it was like I was back in my body. I thought it was really strange, but after that, it was just getting better and better after that point.
Do you think that that was God, or that was an angel?
That's what I believe.
In his darkest day, he saw a light, the appearance of something seemingly sent to him from heaven.
It just kept getting better from that point. It wouldn't go like better and then worse and better and then worse again. It would just get better after that.
Thelonious has trouble holding his head up because of muscle weakness, and he's sensitive to the light. He's legally blind. Scars on his legs mark the places Stevens-Johnson syndrome almost claimed his life.
It just kept getting worse and worse and worse, and it was literally right before our eyes. You could see the blisters spreading. You could look at him.
Growing. It was growing.
1 second and then look back again, and it had moved. It was more and more and more.
It took 4 months for Thelonious to recover and come back to the Gulf Coast. That's when I first heard his remarkable story, and it got me thinking. After understanding all I could about Stevens-Johnson syndrome, I wanted to speak with an expert so I could better understand the experience Thelonious described when he almost watched himself die.
It's an empirical evidence that reaffirms what we've always believed in faith about being human, that there's a deep spiritual dimension, and that we live, the Bible says, not by bread alone, that we also have this spiritual dimension in which we are made for the presence of God, and God's presence sometimes enters into our awareness in surprising ways.
Not the first experience described to Father Viscardi. I asked if he truly believed this young man was visited by Christ.
Well, who knows? I mean, God is not just another little UFO. God is present in all things at all times. So, yeah, I truly believe God is with me right now.
Now on the road to recovery, receiving treatments to hopefully restore his vision. There was something we at News 5 knew we could help Thelonious do. Meet his favorite meteorologist, Alan Seals.
He's your number one fan.
Number one fan. So number one fan, why? Is it me or the weather?
Both.
Well, good. Okay. I prefer it be the weather, but I appreciate it either way.
Thelonious parents now want to spread the word about Stevens-Johnson syndrome because it can happen, and it is devastating, in hopes, much like the teachings of Christ, by spreading the word, more people will believe in healing powers and seek out a way to fight this evil. In Mobile, Haley Minogue, News 5.
We have more resources on our website about Stevens-Johnson syndrome and Thelonious' battle with it. We also have a link to his GoFundMe account if you'd like to donate. Now, we knew this story would be a talker, so we hosted a live Facebook chat and poll called Is Heaven for Real this afternoon. 12,000 of you watched, and more than 450 people left comments. The poll results are now in. An overwhelmingly number of you, 97%, say heaven is real. 3% say it is not real. 602 people responded. If you missed the discussion, it's not too late to participate. Just search for this post and share your voice.
8-year-old Landon and his parents were driving home from church when their car was crushed in a car crash. Landon's dad died at the scene, and so did Landon, twice. He was brought back to life and told his mother about his miraculous experience in heaven. Keep in mind, this little boy died twice and was brought back to life. I'm going to play his story for you now.
I didn't see what he was yelling at. I didn't see the ambulance coming, but I remembered him yelling. That was the last thing I heard from him.
On a Sunday morning in 1997, Julie Kemp, her husband Andy, and their 8-year-old son Landon were driving home from church when an ambulance returning to its station broadsided their car in an intersection. Andy died instantly. Rescuers stabilized Julie, but did not realize there was a third passenger in the car.
They couldn't see his body because of the damage that was done to the driver's side of the car, and Landon was sitting behind his dad. And when they saw Landon's shoe, it took a deeper search for his body. When they pulled Landon out from the back of the car, he was not breathing, and they all started working on him right away to bring him back.
Landon was resuscitated and life-flighted to Carolina's Medical Center. He died 2 more times that day, and both times he was brought back to life. Doctors didn't give Julie much hope for his survival.
They told me that if he lived, which did not look good, but that if he lived, that he would be like an 8-year-old baby, that he would not know how to walk or talk or to eat. I was so desperate that was okay. I would take that just to have him. He was all that I had.
At her husband's funeral, Julie remembers feeling abandoned by God.
I was very disappointed, heartbroken. And while I'm sitting at the funeral, I'm fussing at God. I don't understand why this happened. I don't understand why he didn't send angels to protect us. But in the very next breath, I'm praying as hard to him as I've ever prayed in my life for Landon to live.
Landon had suffered massive head trauma during the accident and remained in a coma.
He's hooked up to all kinds of machines to keep him alive. And there are no signs. There's nothing good or bad. They see nothing happening. I kept praying that he would open his eyes.
After 2 weeks in a coma, Landon opened his eyes. To everyone's amazement, he had no brain damage. But in the midst of her joy, Julie knew she had to tell Landon about his father.
He had scars on his face, and his head was just full of hurt. And I didn't want to hurt him anymore. So I asked Landon, I said, Landon, do you know where your dad is at? And he told me, yes, I know where he's at. I saw him in heaven.
Landon is now grown, but still clearly remembers his amazing experiences in heaven.
I remember being able to see my dad and his friend Olin Palmer
who had passed away less than a month before he did, also in a car accident, and Olin's son, Neil Palmer, who had died on a four-wheeler years before. Never one of us said a word to each other, but we were just all standing there.
He looked over to me and says, "Oh, Mom, by the way, I forgot to tell you, I saw your other two kids." And I just looked at him because I wasn't sure what he was talking about, but I had 2 miscarriages before Landon was born. We had never shared that with Landon. He did not know that we had lost 2 children before him.
I knew that they were my siblings, even though no one had ever told me about them. Just being in heaven, I guess you know your own, or you know who everyone is.
He says each time he died, he had a different experience in heaven. During the third time, he says he met Jesus and was given a mission.
It was almost as if like a preview of a movie to where you only get to see certain bits and pieces of things. Jesus came to me and told me that I have to go back to earth and be a good Christian and tell others about him.
Today, through Grief Share, Landon and Julie use their story to help others who are struggling with loss and in need of hope.
I didn't understand in 1997, why God didn't send an angel, but I know that there were angels there, and I know that we were protected and we are living out what His plan is for us. Instead of staying mad at Him, I was able to use the story to help others not to give up and to keep their faith on their grief journey.
I just want people to realize that Jesus is real. There is a heaven, there are angels, and to follow His word in the Bible, and life does get better at the end.
In her book, Faith Has Its Reasons, Julie says God has used their experience to bring others closer to Him and has brought new blessings to them.
It is a huge blessing that I get to watch my child tell others about Jesus. He is always willing to let others know that there is a heaven because he's been there.
I know I'm doing it for Jesus. I know that He's real. I know that angels are there. I know that there's a heaven. I'm not doing it for someone who I don't know or I've never seen. I've seen Jesus. I know He's there. He's asked me to doing this, and this is what I'm doing.
To a large extent, science and the medical community have attributed these experiences to normal biological function and not to some divine experience. Bright lights and tunnels, a common feature in near-death experiences, are attributed to the synapses of the brain rapidly firing in a desperate effort to stay alive as oxygen leaves and levels drop. The increased brain activity is said to trigger memories lodged deep in the brain, often including memories of long-dead relatives and friends. The feeling of relaxing and calm is attributed to the release of various chemicals as the brain fights to stay alive. As this video shows, there are aspects of near-death experiences which can't be answered by science alone. As you will see, there are incidences of people learning things during their near-death experience which they couldn't have possibly known about beforehand. In addition, some incredible personal accounts, the resulting questions which remain unanswered make these cases even more fascinating. How do you explain people visiting worlds and locations not yet discovered? How can a child recall visiting with a dead friend or relative the child never knew? How can visionary experiences, which eventually come true, be fully explained? In this video, you'll find some truly amazing near-death experiences which stand out from the usual occurrences. I'm going to play you a video called 10 Amazing Near-Death Experiences. These things, amazing is an understatement. These experiences will blow your mind. I'm going to play that video for you now. You ready?
Amazing near-death experiences. Plato. Greek philosopher and mathematician Plato wrote about one of the earliest examples of a near-death experience. In the conclusion of Republic, Plato wrote of a soldier named Air who was killed in battle. Air's body sat for several days but did not decompose like the other fallen men. When his body was about to be burned on a funeral pyre, Air regained consciousness. He told amazed witnesses of an afterlife and reincarnation. He gave accounts of planets and worlds that no one had ever witnessed. Air's story remains one of the first recorded accounts of an amazing near-death experience. Mellon Thomas Benedict. In 1982, artist Mellon Thomas Benedict died of terminal cancer. While he was traveling toward the light, Benedict decided he had questions and wanted to see things first. In an amazing near-death experience, he recalled flying through the solar system, leaving this galaxy and traveling to other worlds that had other life. His journey reportedly took him to far-off worlds and even past the Big Bang into the void of nothingness. Benedict awoke an hour and a half later after he had died. Later tests showed that his cancer had gone into what the doctors called spontaneous remission. Susanna O'Murray. When she was 11 years old, Susanna O'Murray ran out into the road right after a speeding car was coming through. The car struck Susanna and sent her flying into the air. She later stated that while she was up in the air, everything went into slow motion. O'Murray could look down at the car below and noticed a crowd of people standing around watching. Within the group were her two grandmothers, both of whom had been long dead. The two were yelling at Susanna, telling her she couldn't join them yet. With that, everything sped right back up and she hit the hood of the car in the road, ending up relatively unharmed. Dawn Piper. In 1989, Dawn Piper was in the car that hit a transport truck head-on. Declared dead by paramedics, Piper was without a pulse for 90 minutes. While he was dead, he experienced music and smells which were very pleasing. He also met with his grandfather and several other long-deceased acquaintances in front of a very large gate. The whole experience was deemed rather pleasant. The meeting was cut short when Piper began to regain consciousness. His return to life surprised many, including the people who had stopped to pray near his body at the scene of the horrific accident. Amanda Cable. In September 2003, Amanda Cable slipped into unconsciousness after her heart stopped in the hospital. Cable left her body and was eventually greeted by the figure of her daughter, Ruby, wearing a school uniform with her hair up in bunches. Ruby urged her mom down a white tunnel to a gate. After passing through the gate, Ruby slammed the doors behind her mother. When Cable regained consciousness, she was greeted at her bedside by her husband. He had brought a picture of Ruby from the first day of school, which Amanda had missed because she was in the hospital. In the picture, Ruby was wearing a school uniform and had her hair up in bunches, a style she had never before worn. George Rodonea. In 1976, George Rodonea was pronounced dead after being struck by a car. His body was taken to the morgue where it sat for 3 days. When doctors began to cut Rodonea's body to undertake an official autopsy, he regained consciousness to the shock of everyone. Rodonea's shocking recovery was matched by the stories he had while he was dead. During his experience, he relived parts of his life and met various people. With the ability to travel anywhere in time and space, Rodonea said he was able to meet historical figures and travel back in time to eras such as the Roman Empire. Dr. Mary Neal. In 1999, Dr. Mary Neal was kayaking when her craft turned over. Pinned underwater, Neal was without air for up to 25 minutes before help arrived. In her unconscious state, she endured a near-death experience which told of the future. In this instance, however, it was a future she probably didn't want to know. While she was dead, Neal was informed that her 9-year-old son would die. No information concerning the specifics of his death were given. However, the prophecy came true 10 years later when Neal's now 19-year-old son was killed in a car accident. Paul Ike. When he was just 3 years old, Paul Ike fell through the ice of a pond. Pulled from the pond by rescuers, Paul was considered clinically dead because he had no pulse for 3 hours. After considerable work by doctors, Paul's heart started again and the little boy lived to tell an interesting story. Paul claimed he had been floating around in the sky before arriving at a gate. He approached the gate and tried to enter but was turned away by a figure who said to be his late grandmother. As she turned him away from the entrance, her parting message was that Paul's parents were waiting for him. Anita Moorjani. In 2006, Anita Moorjani's fight with terminal cancer seemed to be at an end when she slipped into a coma. As her organs shut down and her body swelled, Anita later reported that she was listening to conversations between doctors and her husband far away from her hospital room. She also saw a vision of her brother traveling on a plane to see her. Both events were later confirmed, but Anita could not have known about them at the time. Allegedly given the choice to live or die, Anita came back to full consciousness and underwent a miraculous recovery whereby her cancer regressed to the point that doctors could find no trace of it. Colton Burpo. When 3-year-old Colton was laying on the hospital surgery table with a burst appendix, doctors feared for the worst. Amazingly, 2 hours later, Colton was out of surgery with some amazing stories to tell. He told his parents that he had met a little girl who was his sister. In fact, Colton's mother had suffered a miscarriage while carrying what would have been a daughter, but they had never told their son about this. He also told them of a conversation he had with a man named Pop. Colton was later able to identify the man in family photos as his paternal grandfather who had died years earlier.
While everybody was watching, we got a rescue call, so I can't spend much more time talking to you, unfortunately. But on the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, you'll see the phone number for our studio. If you have any suggestions on upcoming feeds, please let me know. You can call in, text in, or you can send us a message on Facebook. Our next feed is going to be about astral projection, and it's going to be a pretty interesting one. So I got to get out of here. I'll talk to you guys later. You have a good night.
You're going to come back and see us, aren't you? You better be. We need you. We got to have you. We depend on you. Come on back and see us. Come back for our next feed. I will be watching for you.